Talking about the role of immunohistochemical markers and renal pathology diagnosis. You have already listened to Dr. Surya's session with the wonderful talk where she talked about the interpretation of renal biopsies and immunofluorescence and electron microscopy. As renal pathologists, we know that the integration of light microscopy, immunofluorescence, and whenever available electron microscopy is very important. However, at times immunohistochemistry plays an important genetic analysis, and immunohistochemistry plays a very important part in renal biopsy evaluation. I'll be basically talking about immunohistochemistry as per which is, I'm sorry, the slides are moving. So immunohistochemistry as applied to formalin fixed paraffin embedded tissue, where the enzyme is used and a chromogen substrate is used. So my outline of the talk will be basically about applications, the technique, and the limitations. Just to mention about routine immunoglobulin and complement demonstration on renal biopsies. Of course, we can do it both by immunofluorescence and immunohistochemistry, but most of the centers use immunofluorescence. The advantage being that it has a higher signal to noise ratio. However, immunohistochemistry can also be done as a salvage technique, and with newer kits available in the newer antibodies, it is a viable factor which can be done. So coming on to application of immunohistochemistry in glomerular diseases. If we talk of membranous nephropathy, it is characterized by the thickening of glomerular basement membrane, and the prototype, that is membranous nephropathy, has epimembranous spikes which are algyrophilic, and on immunoglobulin G staining on immunofluorescence, you see the typical granular staining along the glomerular basement membrane. Once you have made a diagnosis of membranous nephropathy, it is important to differentiate between primary and secondary membranous nephropathy, which is based on the clinical parameters and the morphological features, both on light microscopy, immunofluorescence, and also on electron microscopy. However, in the recent years, there has been a major leap with the discovery of a lot of antigens in membranous nephropathy. And this journey began somewhere in 2009, where a phospholipase A2 receptor was identified as a target antigen in idiopathic membranous nephropathy. Now we know that PLA2R can be demonstrated on a biopsy by doing an immunohistochemical or an immunofluorescence stain, and the sensitivity of detecting it on a biopsy is much higher than the serum antibodies which are detected in these patients. Once you have done a staining for PLA2R, it is important that it has to be interpreted properly. We know that PLA2R is an antigen which is normally present in the podocyte cell cytoplasm and the membranes. So the pattern of staining can be very diffuse and non-specific in many of the glomerular diseases. However, in PLA2R associated membranous nephropathy, the staining is typically granular along the glomerular basement membrane. PLA2R staining can also be done by immunofluorescence, where again paraffin embedded tissue is used. So the second antigen which was detected was thrombospondin in 2014, and it is again an antigen which has a serum counterpart to it, but it has also been seen in malignancy associated conditions. So after these two antigens, there have been multitude of antigens which have been now discovered, which are related to both primary and secondary membranous nephropathy. The credit goes largely to Dr. Lawrence Beck from Boston Medical Center and Dr. Sanjeev Sethi from Mayo Clinic, where the integration of laser microdissection techniques and mass spectroscopy has been able to detect a large number of antigens. So now the newer classification of membranous nephropathy looks like something like this, where you can identify the antigens which are related to primary and secondary membranous nephropathy. A word of caution that sometimes an antigen can also be in the primary membranous nephropathy and also associated with secondary conditions, like NEL1 is associated with malignancies, similarly thrombospondin. Some of these antigens have their counterpart serum antibodies, which are useful in monitoring of these patients and seeing the treatment response. The staining of these antigens along the glomerular basement membrane is almost similar to that what you see in PLA2R. And still, however, PLA2R forms a major component of the primary glomerulopathy, that is about 75 to 80%. PLA2R is not only seen in primary membranous, but there have been reports that it is also associated with secondary conditions like hepatitis, sarcoidosis, malignancy, and some autoimmune conditions. So what is a clinical implication of detecting these antigens? Is it useful? So we know that now there is sufficient data to say that antigens like exhaustion 1 and 2, which are associated with SLE and other autoimmune diseases, have a favorable clinical outcome, and the clinician can decide how these patients are treated. Similarly, for example, for NEL1 membranous nephropathy, about almost like 1/3 of these cases are associated with malignancy, and detection of a NEL1 positive membranous nephropathy will trigger an investigation by the clinician for looking for a malignancy which may remain undetected. Similarly, semaphorin 3B has been predominantly seen in children, and there is protocadrin 7, which has been shown to have a spontaneous remission. However, we need more studies to have a definitive data. So the membranous nephropathy is now started looking like something like this, which is antigen specific. And if we were thinking that the antigens are all over, we have new antigens which are reported each month. So these are the two new antigens which have been reported in the last 2 months. One is a high temperature recombinant protein, that is HTRA1, which has been seen in primary membranous nephropathy predominantly in elderly population. And the other is transforming growth factor beta receptor 3, which is seen in primarily in secondary membranous nephropathy, which is related to autoimmune diseases. So there are a number of conditions which can look like membranous thickening on light microscopy. Some of these have an important aspect that immunohistochemistry plays in their diagnosis, and they predominantly present as a nodular glomulosclerosis or an MPGN pattern. When we have the histochemical stains play a very important role in making a diagnosis or a differential diagnosis in these conditions. Along with immunofluorescence for light chains and heavy chains, the integration of the substructure analysis along with the newly developed and diagnosed immunohistochemical markers plays a long way in making these diagnoses. For example, once we have made a diagnosis of amyloid P component, you have a battery of amyloid associated markers which are now available, that is the immunohistochemical markers, and you need to make a subtyping of amyloid because the treatment and the response to treatment all depends upon the type of amyloid. So the panel that you need to use, it also depends upon the morphological features. For example, if you have an amyloid which is predominantly limited to the interstitium, you will think of possibilities like ALEC2, ApoA1 and ApoA4, whereas you may have an amyloid which is predominantly involving the glomerulus. So you will like to do an AFib or a A-gel immunostain. And there are other amyloids which involve all the 4 compartments like amyloid light chain or amyloid associated protein. In our experience, we have seen that amyloid SAA associated amyloid is most common, seen in around 50% of amyloids, and amyloid light chain is seen in about 1/3 of patients. Coming on to the other disease, that is fibrillary glomerulonephritis, which also appears as fibrils on ultrastructure and may be confused with amyloid, more so with the description of something like a congophilic fibrillary GN. So this is a new immunohistochemical marker which has come to the rescue, that is DNA-JB9. You will be hearing more about it from Dr. Priya Alexander, who is also the co-author of the seminal article which was published, which described this immunohistochemical marker. This is just to show one of our cases, which was a 56-year-old lady who presented with nephrotic proteinuria. And what I like to say is that this immunohistochemical stain works really good. It stains really nicely and specifically the glomerulus. And if you have a control with you, it will give you a definite diagnosis. The other area where immunohistochemistry plays an important role is collagenofibrotic glomulopathy, which also looks like an MPGN-like pattern with nodular glomulosclerosis. It has a variable age at presentation, and with the integration of light microscopy, electron microscopy, and immunohistochemistry for collagen 3, you can make a diagnosis of collagenofibrotic glomulopathy. Another condition which is known as a fibronectin nephropathy, which is relatively a rare disease. The histochemical stain really helps in making a diagnosis. It again presents as nodular glomulosclerosis with an MPGN pattern. However, if you have a good empty stain, it lights up with the empty stain as fissionophilic deposits. However, on electron microscopy, it has a very variable appearance. It may just be granular deposits, or it may have a fibrillary deposit. And if you have a clinical suspicion and you do an immunohistochemistry or an immunofluorescence for fibronectin, it will nail the diagnosis because it is generally seen in a younger population, and it will be helpful to make a early diagnosis. Coming on to the traditional historic description of crescents and pseudocrescents, where we have talked about that the pseudocrescents are formed by the proliferation of visceral epithelial cells. The immunohistochemical stains have now shown that pseudocrescents and true crescents are linked anatomically and pathogenetically. The pseudocrescents are formed by the proliferation of dysregulated podocytes, and these are detected in both lesions, both in crescents and in pseudocrescents. And moreover, the parietal epithelial cell proliferation is also seen in the visceral epithelial cell location of the pseudocrescents. So that is how immunohistochemistry has helped in understanding these lesions. This is just to show a rare case of Alport syndrome which presented as crescentic glomerulonephritis, and on light microscopy, it appeared that there is proliferation of the parietal epithelial cells. However, when we did immunohistochemistry, we found that the crescents were almost similar to crescents that you see in immune-mediated crescentic glomerulonephritis and in ANCA-associated crescentic glomerulonephritis. The other applications of immunohistochemistry are varied. You may like to do an immunohistochemistry to look for the origin of these cysts. Sometimes they may be just cysts, and they may look like tubular cysts, but when you do an immunohistochemical stain, you may find that these are staining for the parietal epithelial cells. Similarly, there is sufficient data to support that a MEST C scoring, where it is supplemented by the staining with CD68 staining, it helps in determining the extent of E1 lesions. And you may do in diseases, hepatitis B associated nephropathies, you may like to do immunostains for the typical antigen, especially on fluorescent sections. Collagen stains for Alports and thin basement membrane are predominantly done as an immunofluorescence marker, but they can also be done by immunohistochemistry. Coming on to the applications of immunohistochemistry in tubulointerstitial diseases, it is important to understand that the nephron develops embryologically, then parts of the nephron develop from the different origins. So there is a difference in the staining pattern of the proximal tubules and the distal tubules. The areas where immunohistochemistry is important is something where you know that TAM-Horsfall protein are traditionally they're called as PS positive casts, but sometimes they can be PS negative and they may be quite heterogeneous, and they may even present as fractures. So they may be confused with light chain cast nephropathy, where immunohistochemistry comes to the rescue. Of course, you can do a light chain staining, and you can also stain them for uromodulin immunohistochemistry, where you can detect these to be TAM-Horsfall protein, and an internal control acts, the thick ascending limb of the nephron acts as an internal control, where the TAM-Horsfall proteins are produced. The other application may be in myoglobin casts and hemoglobin casts, both of which need immunohistochemistry for their detection. Just to make a point, that Prussian blue stain for iron is not helpful in making a diagnosis of hemoglobin cast nephropathy, because it occurs with intravascular hemolysis, and it is really important to make this diagnosis. The RBCs act as internal control, and they act and give a very faint, weak staining. The other areas are the tubulointerstitial nephritis. We know that autoimmune diseases have an interstitial infiltrate which is predominantly rich in CD3 cells. Other area where immunohistochemistry plays a major role is IgG4 related tubulointerstitial nephritis, where looking at the predominant cell population, the IgG4 positive plasma cells is important, apart from other histological features. Coming on to the applications of immunohistochemistry in renal graft biopsies. In renal graft biopsy evaluation, immunohistochemistry has become a part of the normal procedure. We do not routinely do it, but it is important to understand that T-cell mediated rejection and antibody mediated rejection may have different profiles. TCMR is usually the tubulitis, the endarteritis, and the peritubular capillaritis is associated with predominance of T cells. Whereas in ABMR, the predominant cells in the microvascular inflammation are macrophages. Therefore, the macrophage T cell ratio is more than 1 in ABMRs. Apart from these, you may also find CD56 positive natural killer cells. And though it does not require immunohistochemistry, but neutrophilic microvascular inflammation and neutrophilic tubulitis may also be pointers towards a ABMR related pathology, that is antibody mediated rejection. C4D is of course a part of the normal evaluation of renal biopsies. Typically on immunohistochemistry, it stains as a linear deposit along the peritubular capillaries and can also stain the glomerular basement membrane. It can also be done by immunofluorescence, and there are a number of studies which talk about the comparative analysis of C4D staining by immunohistochemistry and immunofluorescence. And most of the reports suggest that immunofluorescence is more sensitive, and that is why where we have C4D staining as 1 to 10% of the peritubular capillaries, it is taken as positive by immunohistochemistry, whereas it is taken as negative by immunofluorescence according to the latest BAMF 2013 schema for C4D staining in graft biopsies.
Excuse me, the organizers want you to be a bit brief.
Yeah, it is. I'm just completing. It's all over. So, the other area where it is very important to look for immunohistochemical markers is transplant infections. So now immunohistochemistry is important for the classification of polyoma virus nephropathy, and the polyoma virus load according to the percentage of tubules involved is important. And you look at the nuclear staining of the polyoma virus nephropathy. The other infections are adenovirus, which presents as a necrotizing neutrophilic hemorrhagic tubulointerstitial nephritis, and cytomegalovirus infection. Just a point of caution that sometimes you may have an overlap and a combination of infections, and it is important to do double staining. Of course, in PTLD, it is important to look at CD20 markers, and also for EBER-ish. This is one of our cases of an EBV-related monomorphic PTLD. RNA in situ hybridization is more sensitive and specific for detection. There are a number of areas which I cannot cover on immunohistochemistry. Just a point that we have been doing immunohistochemistry in a number of conditions, and we have seen that you can combine a PA stain with immunohistochemistry, which gives a better staining, and it is easier to count these cells. Just 2 slides about the technique. There, as compared to other tissues, immunohistochemistry on renal biopsies may be difficult because of a non-specific background staining, because of the presence of an endogenous biotin activity. So you now with the polymer based methods, it has become easier. Fixation is very important. Antigen retrieval for immunoglobulins and complements is done by proteolytic digestion, whereas for other antigens, it can be done by heat induced epitope retrieval. And with our experience, automated immunostaining is better. Of course, you have to control the enzyme digestion. It can be combined with the heat induced epitope retrieval. For the limitations, I've already talked about background staining. Tissue can be an issue, and you can even use frozen tissue for immunohistochemistry. Reports suggest that IgG, IgA staining is almost similar to immunofluorescence, exception being linear deposits of IgG, which are not detected by IHC. And IgM, C3 and C1q show a lot of variability. And this is evident by the fact by these 2 reports, which suggest that LEG2 can and cannot be reliably distinguished by immunohistochemistry. Of course, it depends upon different labs and the conditions of fixation of the tissue, which are very important, and each lab has to standardize it. So this is a summary of the conditions in which immunohistochemistry is really important for renal biopsy diagnosis for glomerular diseases, tubulointerstitial diseases, and for graft biopsies. So we as renal pathologists are used to seeing a very colorful world of all histochemical stains, and now we have another color, that is the brown, which is there to stay. With these words, I end up my presentation, and I would like to acknowledge the Department of Pathology, especially our laboratory technical staff, and the Department of Nephrology, who are our colleagues, and they're always there to help us. Thank you so much.